I've only ever played the second Kane Lynch game, which was actually quite mediocrely received. In fact, I remember back then watching the hilarious Angry Joe review on that sequel when it was new. But I have heard for a long time that IO Interactive was trying to do something new, and for whatever reason, they couldn't get this series to kind of jump off in the same way that the Hitman games did. And ultimately, as we all know, this series sort of is just dead in the water and no longer around today. But the concept of what is here, though, is quite fantastic. So, in any case, Kane Lynch Dead Men here, I picked it up from my collection and I started playing. And I only ever played the sequel, Dog Days. And I have to admit that upon first starting this game, I was quite surprised the more that I played it with just how much more ambitious this original game was in comparison to the sequel that I played. So while Dog Days did in fact make improvements to the gunplay and the overall playability, and by the way, that is the weakest element of this game is the gameplay. I must say that although that is the case, the original outing here just seems so much more expansive than the sequel ever was. For one, it takes place in multiple different areas. You aren't being confined to just, Hong Kong like the sequel was. You pretty much go all over. And this original game has you playing as Kane this time around, who I must say is just a much better character, much more empathetic as well than someone like Lynch. You are a professional criminal, however, these aren't great people by any means. You're basically a psychopath, and the game starts off with you being on death row for manslaughter. And Lynch is there as well. You kind of meet up with him, and the two start to form this bond and this relationship, and they're kind of working together here. But you're broken out of prison, and sort of, Lynch is following you through, taking, advantage of the opportunity, so to speak. And you fall in the hands of another criminal gang who claims that Kane has kind of stolen an obscene amount of cash from them. And in the wake of this, they have taken his family hostage, and you basically have to find a way to pay them back in order to save his family. So this starts the immediate trek of, you going on these heists and you trying to basically work your way through the food chain in order to get the cash necessary to free Kane's family. And Lynch kind of goes along with you as, again, someone sort of taking advantage of the opportunity. And the two start to kind of, I guess, clash and form this bond over the course of this game. I have to say immediately that this is so much more engaging than the more simple plot that we got from Dog Days, and it tends to lend itself to a more cinematic narrative as a result of this. Again, you're just kind of taking, all over the place here. You're dealing with various different heists and meeting all the sort of the criminal underworld of the city and stuff, and it's quite interesting, and the way it plays out is quite fun as well. Now, gameplay-wise, yes, this is a third-person shooter, but I have to say that it has a bit of a wonky control setup and cover system, especially. In retrospect, this game feels a lot more floaty to play, and especially coming out, you have to keep in mind that this was during the same year as the first Uncharted, Mass Effect, and Advanced Warfighter 2, all of which were third-person over-the-shoulder, games that just played so much better than this. The overall gunplay leaves a lot to be desired here. Now, the levels and the concepts of the different heists and the moments that you find yourself in still do make this game exciting to play. It's just the idea that you have to be more patient and kind of slower with your aiming. And, you can tell that they are really inspired by the likes of Michael Mann's Heat. And the level I'm showing off today is very reminiscent of that city street shootout scene. There's just, all this chaos and all this stuff happening around you. And I would say that this game is a really fantastic collection of epic classic heist sequences, only hampered down by the inconsistent gameplay and the cover mechanic that just isn't as intuitive as you probably would have hoped, especially from other games that were coming out around this time. At the very least, when you get downed or when you run out of health, your AI companions can help revive you, and this helps prevent some frustration because, you don't have to restart from a checkpoint. You can just get up from the battlefield and run to cover. This game does include a full cooperative mode throughout its entire campaign, but again, as someone who was only playing this for the first time recently, I had to sort of contend with just playing by myself. And, speaking a bit upon the AI, I would say for the most part, this was hassle free. The AI isn't as aggressive, and they kind of just stand out in the open and shoot anything that moves, but don't really deal a lot of damage. I think they're basically there to kind of revive you as you make your way through the levels and get downed a couple of times. But still, regardless of dealing with that, I think that the experience here is still quite enjoyable. And a nice part about this is the pacing of these stages. Many times you'll have the opportunity to explore these levels in a Hitman like fashion before initiating the heist, and you even have some stealth opportunities as well. You can kind of see how later games like the Payday franchise kind of adopted this same mechanic. To me, this game felt like they were really trying their best to just add a lot of variety and a lot of dynamics to the gameplay, but perhaps it was just a bit too ambitious for their skill set. You just really get the idea that they wanted this sort of unique blend of cinematic action inspired by older crime films, this noirish narrative mixed throughout, and the variety of stages here. But unfortunately, I think they just bit off a bit more than they could chew at the time, and the result is a game that conceptually sounds incredible and sounds really engaging, but just isn't quite all there when it comes down to the polish and all the mechanics and stuff that they implemented into the actual game. Quick break to take a look at the Kane Lynch box art on Xbox 360. I really like the cover art for this one. We get a nice stark white background with sort of the character silhouettes and the guns there, and I think it looks quite nice. Now on the spine here, pretty simple as well, and then on the back we got a couple different screenshots kind of showing off the heist gameplay and some text kind of setting up the story, talking a bit about the characters and the world, and of course the history of the studio. Now, opening it up here, we got a nice clean copy of the game disc, again following that kind of stark white art style, and I like the sort of red accents with the text and the blood splatter. That also is quite nice. Now, the manual itself is actually, pretty well put together, I must say. It is black and white, which is a bit unfortunate, but you do actually have a really nice setup here with character bios, a bit about the weapons and the gameplay elements. There's a look at the controls and stuff like that. So although it is black and white, it actually is quite plentiful in the pages that it offers, reaching over 20 pages total. So I think it's a little bit more well put together. It's just kind of unfortunate that they didn't go with the color scheme of adding some red accents to this. I think that would have been nice. Now on the back here, this is kind of really funny and cool. We have a look at the Kane Lynch Dead Men mobile game for phones back then. I thought that'd be a kind of a nice thing to show off there. So anyway, yeah, that's a nice look at the Kane Lynch Dead Men box art, and I really like the cover art for this one. Now, graphically, Kane Lynch is pretty respectable for the era. This is running off an early iteration of their Glacier engine, which would go on to be a very scalable and quite beautiful engine with the releases of like Hitman Absolution and its subsequent reboots at the time. I do think detail-wise, Kane Lynch, separates itself a bit more from the competition here. For one, something that stood out to me while I was playing this game was that it had a very realistic yet more vibrant color palette. Often games from this era get complaints for just being too dreary or desaturated and having this sort of, brown grayish filter over everything. But in this game though, you just see these vibrant colors throughout the levels, and the color tone remains a lot cooler than other games released during this time, and I think this just helps the game age a lot better than most during this era. Another thing that stood out to me in particular is the level of destruction in this game. I'm playing in this more corporate environment in this level just because the whole level kind of is like a playground almost, with all this destruction around you. But you can see that nearly everything is destructible, and for the record, the other levels in the game also have equally impressive destruction. But just concrete, just chips away, and just slabs of it just start falling everywhere. You have pieces of glass that kind of shatter, and all of this stays on screen as well. So, this helps make the firefights seem a lot more intense, and just the whole overall gameplay feel a lot more dynamic as well. So, although the actual gunplay is floaty by design, you at least have fun and feel the impact of the bullets as they're hitting the environment, and just seeing the environment kind of chip and break away in your wake. So it's quite fun in that regard. Now, aliasing is present throughout the experience, although from what I'm to understand, the PS3 version, although is a match quality-wise for the 360, which wasn't always a given at the time, it's a lot more worse when it comes to just image quality. It has little to no AA whatsoever compared to the 360's 4x MSAA implementation. So you just get a smoother presentation on the 360 throughout. But from what I understand, the PS3 version is at least a match in terms of quality and detail and assets compared to what was on the 360. Now, I did have to play this on original Xbox 360 hardware. Sadly, this game is not backwards compatible with the Series X. However, its sequel, Dog Days, is, oddly enough. Now, I'm assuming this has something to do with the music licenses or other licenses, because it's sort of a shame that, you could imagine that this is one that could have definitely used the enhancements to at least performance in some way. That being said, the frame rate on original hardware, at least speaking to the Xbox 360, is stable enough to a point. I'd probably consider this on par with many games released during this era, but that being said, you will notice some drops, especially in the larger levels and firefights. And this is one of those games that actually slows down the gameplay with the frame rate. So the firefights, if you get like a bunch of people in these wide open areas and the game starts dropping frames, you'll notice that the game's almost running in slow motion as it's trying to balance out the frame rate. So it could be a detriment or a helpful tool to your gunfights, as you can kind of more easily tell what's going on, but it is a weird side effect of having the frame rate bogged down. Some games during this era just did that for whatever reason. But overall, I will say that you had solid visuals, good art direction. I can't really complain about anything here except character models, which I think could have been just a bit better. But environmentally speaking, I think this game has a lot more going for it that helps it stick out, at least from the other games around this era. Now, as we're finishing up here, I want to first touch upon the music. This is okay. There are a few standout songs with some guitar riffs and more exciting music, but I did find that the way the soundtrack is mixed is it's designed to be more in the background, and it's never really given ample opportunity to be noticed. Mostly through these firefights, you hear the screaming of the guards and your teammates and just the gunshots, and the music, although is there, you have to kind of really pay attention to notice it. I do think the variety here is also a bit lacking when it comes to the music. Again, besides a couple of standout tracks, a lot of the songs sound very similar to each other, and it can be hard to sort of tell them apart and see what sort of theme you're supposed to be feeling is kind of going on here. It's definitely a style, though. It's just not a very impactful one, and I found myself sort of hard pressed to even remember what I was hearing playing through most of the game myself. So I must say that I went into Kane Lynch, Dead Men here, not really sure what to expect. When I think about this title, often what comes to mind is the controversy surrounding Jeff Gertzman and his firing at GameSpot for giving this game a terrible score, an absolutely horrible score of 6 out of 10. I imagine some of you that are watching this may have been a bit too young to have paid attention back then, but yeah, GameSpot was advertising Kane Lynch Dead Men prior to release, and it was time for the game to come out, and Jeff was in charge of giving a review, and he gave this game a 6 out of 10, and GameSpot fired him basically for I guess it not being in line with the advertising that they had for the game at the time. And it was probably around that same time where the era of gaming journalism was just really falling apart, and again, YouTube was just on the rise. And it's funny because when I think about this game, I just recall when all of that was happening, and it was just a huge deal. A lot of people were discussing it online back then. But, thinking back, I have to say that a critical score of 6 out of 10, as a slightly above average due to just this game's level variety, the sequences, the overall change in direction from IO, but really missing out on the quality of the experience. I mean, again, games like Uncharted and Mass Effect launched in the same month with substantially better visuals and more playable gameplay than this. But in retrospect, I do think that the first game here is a much more ambitious effort than the sequel was. And playing it despite these issues, I have to say that I enjoyed it more than I remember enjoying Dog Days. Although again, I think a replay of that game is also due pass as it's been so long. So yeah, despite all the issues, I did have fun with Dead Men. I did enjoy the overall experience. And those are my thoughts I wanted to share. So let me know what you guys think. If you played this one back in the day, what did you think? What did you love or not love about it? And we can discuss more in the comments. Appreciate you guys watching and have a great day.